Hello and welcome, Inspired Podcast community. This is your new episode. My name is Caroline, and my today's guest is Ed Doherty, and I'm so happy that you are here. How are you doing?
I am optimistic. It's my pleasure to be here with you.
I love what you said about optimism. I share that mindset or that state of mind too, and I would love to introduce you to the audience, of course.
hmm
So, you are the founder of Ambrose Landon Consulting, where you work with organizations on strategic planning, leadership development, and employee engagement. Your previous leadership roles span national businesses and nonprofits, including positions as Chief Human Resource Officer for an 11,000 employee company and president of a $22 million restaurant company. You are a graduate of UMass, and I had to look this up. It is Massachusetts, and then comes Amherst, and you are an advocate for mentoring and personal development, having run your first marathon at 70 and published your first book at 72. You also volunteer for leadership mentoring organizations. Welcome to the Inspired Podcast, Ed Doherty.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Thank you for saying yes to our interview. And my first question for you is big surprise. You've had an extensive leadership career across industries from HR to running a restaurant company. How has your approach to leadership evolved over the years, and what core principles remain constant?
I think the first thing that comes to mind is leading by example. When I was very young, I somehow I thought people who didn't lead by example were hypocrites, and I didn't want to be a hypocrite. So my earliest self-generated cliche was, "I'll never ask anybody to do anything I haven't done, I won't do,"
I
and it's
understand.
held me in good stead. I think being a leader by example is probably the safest leadership strategy anybody could have.
Yes, absolutely. So you walk the walk and talk the talk, as some people say. It's not like acting as if you are that leader that you pretend to be, let's say. And this is the best way, because there are so many people out there faking it till they make it, and they will never make it because that's not the way it works, right?
Right, and I think people are very discerning today. I think people can smell a phony a mile away. I recently read some things that we're about to enter the era of authenticity. And it's too bad it's taken so long, but I think authentic people are going to win moving forward, and phonies or BSers are going to lose.
Absolutely. I love that concept. It's not a concept. Authenticity comes from within your heart. You speak from your heart, and there's nothing like fake around you. It is your true self. You are honest with yourself. And I think the next word that comes into my mind is integrity as well, right?
Yes, I think that it's hard. You have to want to be able to sleep soundly at night. And I think if you are not honest, you're struggling to do that sometimes.
Yeah, that's so true. Yes, it comes all back to you, what you do to other people,
Mhm.
or how you hurt them, harm them, whatever. So leading by example is your answer to the question how to lead. And yeah, and you've been a strong advocate for mentoring and personal development throughout your career. What advice would you give to leaders looking to implement effective mentoring programs within their organizations?
Well, the one um, tricky part of mentoring is you have to have people who are willing to accept feedback. And one of the things that I've done consistently is I require people that I am mentoring to request feedback. I need to be certain, because the more I believe they'll accept feedback, the more transparent I can be with them. So if an organization was looking to start a mentoring program, the first thing they should do is solicit mentors and validate that these people have something to share. Because I believe that finding mentees is very easy. I think mentees would flock to a flower like bees would, because being mentored saves you so much time, so much energy, and so much scar tissue. It's the easiest and fastest way to get better is to have a mentor.
Wow, I love what you said about the more the people accept feedback, the more transparent you can be. And also, you talked about people are willing to be mentored, but at the same time, maybe they have closed minds. They are not coachable, we would say today. And there's nothing more expensive than a closed mind, right?
Mhm. Well, it's interesting because sometimes you give someone a recommendation or advice, and when they completely ignore it or go the other way, you know that they're not willing to accept feedback. On the other hand, when someone responds and then gets back to you and say, "Hey, this worked or this didn't work," you know that they're receptive to feedback and you're more likely to give them feedback in the future.
Okay, that means first you test the people if they are if they are willing to accept, and then you make a decision
Yeah,
if you
I think you have to validate. I don't think someone says, "Yeah, mentor me, please mentor me," and you just dive off the diving board and do it. I think you have to validate that they're sincere and that they are willing hear feedback and be mentored.
Okay, can you explain for me as a non, it's not my mother language, can you explain the difference between to validate and to qualify?
Well, I would use validate to confirm.
Mhm.
So you're confirming that they are accepting feedback. That's what I would say validate would be.
Okay, I understand. That means when you validate, that means you already know that the person, so you are optimistic, right? So
Yeah.
validate is like, oh yeah, I just confirm. And to qualify is you don't know, you come from doubt, you don't know whether they are.
Yeah. Let me tell you a story that's also in my book. Um, I was operating restaurants in the Los Angeles, California area. I had 56 restaurants that I was responsible for. And the vice president toured the restaurants with me. So we got in the same car. We went around and visited restaurants. It was a couple 100-mile drive. On the way back, I stopped at a gas station and I got I got I got my credit card out of the visor. I had an envelope for receipts. I had a record. I kept it down. And when we pulled out of the gas station, he said to me, "Ed, you know what you do best in your job?" I said, "What?" He says, "Get gas. You get gas better than any other regional manager I have. But if you don't do better at the other stuff, you're not going to make it." And so he talked to me on the way back to the office. I took heart. I responded to his feedback. And every week when we met, he'd give me more feedback. I'd give him more. And eventually, someone needed to be a regional vice president in San Francisco. And I was the one selected because I still maintain to this day, I accepted his and acted on his feedback.
Oh, I love that. I absolutely love this story. So you talked about your book already. What can you tell us more? Yeah, because you wrote it at the age of 72.
Right. So um, I've had a lot of life experiences. And when I was leading a group, when email was invented, I don't know if you remember when email was invented, but when email was invented, I would send a weekly email to everybody on my team. And it was, "This is coming up, reminder, congratulations," just the regular laundry list of things. And at the end, I would put something in I called a commentary. And it was my observation about something. It could have been about the economy. It could have been about an event we did. It could have been about dealing with volunteers or somebody else, but it was an opinion piece. Well, when the pandemic started, I got furloughed, and I didn't want to be lost. I didn't want to be forgotten. I hadn't yet started my business yet. So I started something I call the Wednesday weblog. And what I did is I took some of my generic observations and I started sending them out every Wednesday morning at 4:30 in the morning to my contacts so they wouldn't forget about me. So I sent this out to hundreds of people every week. I've been doing it now for more than 4 years. And the book consists of 60 of the best stories that I wrote in the Wednesday weblog. For example, when I was 10 years old, I had a paper route. You remember what newspapers are, right?
Yes,
Yeah, so
yes.
we used to deliver them. And I took it over from a kid and he didn't train me right. So the first day on my own, I delivered the wrong papers. I told my dad, and he made me provide every one of my customers with a note that said, "My name is Ed Doherty. This is my phone number. I promise to deliver your paper on time and it will be dry." And I had to put that in every house. And at 10 years old, I learned about responsibility. There was not, I was accountable now, it was important. So there's stories from when I was 10 years old. There's also stories from when I obviously ran a marathon at 70 years old, and how I did it and what the training was like and so on and so forth. So I just told stories. A book is a collection of stories. For example, Larry Bird, the Boston Celtics basketball player, Hall of Fame basketball player, I did an all-nighter with Larry Bird once, filming a television commercial. And I talk about that story and what happened with Larry. And I have, because I have so much experience with so many different things, there's a lot of stories in the book that most of them have lessons. I'll give you another example. One of my principles is if you want to be successful, you have to work hard when no one's looking. Okay?
Yes.
So when I was working through college, I spent one summer as a pipe fitter in a Navy shipyard. I was a pipe fitter, third class unskilled. That was my official title, third class unskilled. Great for your self-esteem to be called third class and unskilled. My leader, my team leader, spent most of the summer teaching me how to not work, how to hide, how to go to the restroom and stay there for hours and do crossword puzzles, how to just avoid working. And the interesting thing was, it was a big Navy ship, and there was these holes in the bulkhead that a large supervisor couldn't fit through, but a skinny 18-year-old kid could. And so I learned to hide down there, and a lot of people did. And so the thing that bothered me was the Vietnam War was still going on. The country needed these ships, and these guys were just looking out for themselves.
Yes.
And when the shipyard closed a few years later, wasn't a surprise to me. These guys were taking advantage instead of thinking long term. Part of that story was I went to this place called Pete's. It was a restaurant across the street, and everybody lined up at 11:30 at the time card shack, punched their card, ran across the street, and Pete had 180 seats. And at every place setting, there was a quart of beer and a ham sandwich. And it was free to get in, and you paid to get out. And some guys stayed there all day and just came back in at the end of the day to punch out. And so it taught me about ethics and working hard and doing the right thing. And again, I was only 18 years old, and that lesson lasted me my whole life.
Oh, it's a good lesson how to not work. And then your father taught you how to become, yeah, responsibility. You talked about that when you wrote that note to all of, it was not your neighbors, but I imagine in your neighborhood you were delivering newspapers. I love that story, and I think people love stories in general.
Mhm.
Yes. Okay, let's have a look at my next question. Here, running a marathon at 70 and publishing a book at 72 are remarkable accomplishments. How do you stay motivated to take on such challenges, and how do you apply that mindset in your consulting work with clients?
Okay, well, let me tell you about running first. One day, my wife suggested that maybe I should walk and spend less time on the couch. So I started walking every day, rain or shine, snow. Sometimes I only walked 20 steps, but I went outside and I walked over 400 days in a row, and I was pretty proud of myself. And then one day I said, hey, maybe I could run. And so I ran about 100 yards, and I was in shock. I just couldn't believe that I actually did it. So the next day I decided to run a mile, and I did it. And I was, holy, this is unbelievable. So that's how I started running. I just started running, and then I entered a 5K. And of course, I hurt myself because I didn't know how to run. And I went to physical therapy, and my physical therapist turned into my running coach. And then I ran another 5K and another one, and then I ran a 10K and another one. And then I said to her one day, I said, maybe I could run a half marathon someday. And she says, it's about time you realize that. And I said, okay. And so altogether, I run 6 half marathons. But one day I came to her and I said, do you think I could run a marathon? And she says, of course you could. And so I ramped it up, and she was mentoring me. You know, I mentioned mentoring a little earlier. She was mentoring me right through the process. And now I didn't set any records on my marathon. It took me 6 hours and 18 minutes, but I wasn't running for speed. I was running to finish. If I had to crawl, I was going to, go over that finish line. So how do I apply that to my business work? Sometimes you have to start small. Sometimes you just have to get off the couch. If you want to develop a training culture in a company, you have to train someone to start. You have to learn about training. You have to see, and so that's kind of what I do. When you're running a 5K, you might be in a hurry, but when you're running a marathon at 70 years old, you're not in a hurry. You just want to do it right. You want to avoid injury, and in addition, when I ran that marathon, I raised money for a nonprofit. I raised $13,000, which, made me feel really good and kept me going. I took the money, I just have to finish it. So I would say that's the big thing about running that I apply to my business. As far as the book goes, I think that leaders sometimes say things that have a message, but they leave it to the follower to figure out what the message is. And my book is, here's the message, here's the implications, and almost every story in the book, you'll read it and say, I could do that. I could do that. One of my most popular stories, for example, is I worked across the street from Fenway Park where the Boston Red Sox play. And for whatever reason, I made friends with an 80-year-old usher. He was enthusiastic. He was fired up. He called everybody by name, even if he didn't know their names. I think he made them up. He was great with the kids. He winked at he was just a great guy. And there was a season ticket holder who didn't use their tickets. And so for 6 innings every day, almost every day, we would sit together I'm 25 with an 80-year-old usher watching the game, and he would share his wisdom with me. And I'm not sure how much I learned, but I will tell you, we were moving away to California, and we realized he had nobody to have Christmas with. So we invited him to our house for Christmas, and there were some things we could have gotten him. And one of the things I got him was a little red towel so that he could wipe off the seats, as people were sitting down. Now, he hadn't been to Christmas anywhere probably in 10 years. He hadn't received any gifts. And when he opened that present of that little red towel, his eyes teared up. You could tell it meant something to him. So we moved away, but every year I'd come back and I would find him and we would talk and say, catch up. And one year I came back and he wasn't at the station. And I thought the worst. So I talked to someone who said, no, he's over under the stands guarding a gate. So it was a innocent job. He was just sitting on a folding chair by a turnstile. So I went over to see him, and we could tell that it was the last time we were going to see each other, because he wasn't in good health, and I could tell, and he knew that. And so we talked about this, and while we were there, he said, by the way, thank you, and held up the little red towel. It was 10 years later. And so I'm sure the little red towel is with him in heaven.
Wherever he is now, we are thinking, no, he is right here. He is with us. He's listening. And I love that. Not analogy, it is the image of the red towel. I see it, and I love your story as well. Thank you so much for sharing. It's so great. It's an inspiration, and that shows us to be the difference we want to see in the world, of course, because it makes a difference, even though we don't see it in the first place, right? Thank you so much. My next question about your goals and intentions. Do you set goals for yourself, and what is one of your next projects?
Sure. I recently read that only 1% of the population sets goals. So if you want to stand out, you should have a goal. So I have two things I'm working on. They both involve a microphone. One of the characteristics of my book, there are people on my weblog, there are people who get my weblog every week that I haven't seen in 25 years. And what they say to me is they can hear me when they read it, because I write like I talk. So one of the things I'm about to start is I'm going to do an audiobook where I read all of my stories so that people can hear what it sounds like. So that's my next project, and I hope to have that out before the holidays.
I love that. Thank you so much for sharing, and I would love to listen to that audiobook, of course.
Okay.
So now when people reach out to you after listening to this episode, where can they find you? And do you have special offers or services?
So the probably the easiest place to find me right now is on LinkedIn, Edward J. Doherty, and that's where you can actually see some of my Wednesday weblogs because I post them to LinkedIn. But I'd be happy to connect with you. My consulting company, ambroselandon.com, is my website. And pretty soon I'll be launching a book website, observationsattthespeedoflife.com. So those are the three things that I have going on. Currently, the book is available on Amazon, Barnes and Noble, and eventually the ebook is also available there. But eventually, the audio book will also be at Apple and Spotify and so on and so forth.
That's so great. Thank you so much for sharing. I look forward to listen to it, as I said. And now, before we close, do you have a last message to the audience?
Yes. When I was 20 years old, I started working in a restaurant and I saw this poster on the wall. And I'm going to read it to you. And this is 50 something years ago. And it was a quote from Calvin Coolidge, who was a president of the United States at one time. He said, "Nothing in the world can take the place of persistence. Talent will not. Nothing is more common than unsuccessful men with talent. Genius will not. Unrewarded genius is almost a proverb. Education will not. The world is full of educated derelicts. Persistence and determination alone are omnipotent. The slogan 'Press On' has solved and always will solve the problems of the human race." Persistence.
My favorite chapter, as I told you, in Napoleon Hill's book, but of course, persistence is older than the book. It's as old as humanity, right? So
Mm-hmm.
thank you so much for our interview. It was an honor and a pleasure.
Thanks for having me. It was nice to be had.
Thank you and see you in the next episode.